Let me ask you a question that might sting a little bit.
Oh boy.
I mean it. Do you feel educated?
That is a loaded question.
Right. And I am not asking if you have a degree or a certificate hanging on your wall to prove you paid tuition somewhere.
Sure.
I mean, do you feel like your education actually continued after you walked off that graduation stage?
For a lot of people, the answer is no.
Exactly. Or do you feel like in this age of constant distraction and doom scrolling, you are just skimming the surface of everything and truly knowing nothing?
It is the difference between having a credential and having a well-trained mind.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, that is a gap that seems to be getting wider every single year.
It really is. And that is exactly why we are here today. Discover a new in-depth approach to book coverage with this extended summary.
Yes.
Unlike our previous review, which offers a focused analysis, this feature delivers a comprehensive overview tracing the intellectual roots, key arguments, and real-world impact of this subject.
It is a massive topic.
It is. If you appreciate this expanded format and find it helpful, let us know. Your feedback will help shape future content.
It is quite an undertaking we have ahead of us today.
It definitely is. And just so everyone is on the same page, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book summaries.
Absolutely.
Today, we are tackling a book that acts as basically a rescue mission for our attention spans. We are looking at the updated edition of The Well-Educated Mind, A Guide to the Classical Education You Never Had by Susan Wise Bauer.
This book is fascinating. It is essentially an apology for serious reading in adulthood.
An apology?
Right, I don't mean apology like she's saying sorry. I mean it in the classical sense, a defense. Bauer's central thesis is that a well-educated mind isn't built by just sitting in a classroom for 4 years in your early 20s.
Thank goodness.
It is built by an ongoing, disciplined engagement with demanding books.
Which is a huge relief to hear, honestly. The whole thing is framed as a manual for adults who feel like they missed out on that traditional great books education.
The people who nod along when someone mentions Plato, but secretly have no idea what he actually said.
Exactly. It is for people who want to train their minds, not just accumulate trivia to win at pub quizzes.
And Bauer explicitly frames this against the backdrop of our current social context. She sketches a world of total fragmentation.
We are constantly bombarded with snippets of information.
Constantly. She argues that formal schooling often teaches us about books like we learn the plot summary, the author's birth date, the historical era, but it rarely teaches us how to actually read them.
That is such a key distinction. I mean, knowing that War and Peace is about Russia versus actually possessing the mental tools to navigate the text yourself.
Huge difference.
So let's unpack the solution she proposes. It all revolves around this concept of the trivium.
Yes, the trivium.
Now, I will be honest, when I hear the word trivium, I instantly think of medieval monks in a drafty monastery.
A lot of people do.
Can you break down how Bauer repurposes this for the modern person with a demanding job and a smartphone?
It is way less esoteric than it sounds. The trivium is just the core methodology of classical education, but Bauer adapts it specifically for the adult self-educator.
Okay.
It consists of 3 stages applied to reading: grammar, logic, and rhetoric.
3 stages.
Think of them as 3 distinct passes over the exact same material.
Okay, let's take them one by one. First up is grammar. To me, that sounds like checking for commas and spelling errors.
That is the common trap.
Yeah.
In the classical sense, grammar is about grasping the facts, the raw data.
Just the basics.
Right. When you open a book and apply the grammar stage, you are simply asking, what does this actually say?
Not what does it mean?
No, not yet.
Yeah.
If it is a novel, who are the characters? What is the plot? If it is history, what specific events are being described?
So it is the who, what, where, and when.
Precisely. And this is actually harder than it sounds because we are trained to skim.
We really are.
We constantly try to analyze the meaning of a paragraph
Yeah,
before we have even fully absorbed what the sentences physically say.
that makes sense.
The grammar stage requires you to slow down and answer one question. Do I understand the literal meaning of this page?
So you are completely avoiding the temptation to interpret before you even know what happened.
Exactly.
Then comes the second stage, which is logic.
This is where you analyze the validity of the argument or the structure of the narrative. You ask, is this true? Is it coherent?
But you aren't asking if you like it yet.
No, absolutely not. You are asking, why did the author put this chapter here? How does the conclusion follow from the evidence presented? You are looking under the hood at the mechanics of the text.
It is like being a mechanic looking at an engine. You aren't driving the car yet. You are just seeing how the pistons connect to the crankshaft.
That is a perfect analogy. And finally, after all that, you reach rhetoric.
Which is where we finally get to have an opinion.
Yes, rhetoric is the highest stage. This is where you actively engage in what she calls the great conversation.
Okay, what do I think about this?
Right. How does this apply to the wider world?
Yes.
How does this contradict what I read last week?
I see.
Bauer heavily emphasizes that you cannot honestly reach the rhetoric stage, that stage of judgment, until you have done the grunt work of grammar and logic.
That is where most of us fail, isn't it?
Completely.
We jump straight to, I liked it, or I hated it, or this author is an absolute idiot, without really understanding what the author is trying to do or how they built their argument.
We prioritize our emotional reaction over our actual comprehension.
Wow.
Bauer addresses this head-on in chapter number 2, which she titles Wrestling with Books. She describes reading not as a form of relaxation, but as an active struggle.
I loved that metaphor. She totally busts this myth of the slow reader.
Yes, the shame of reading slowly.
I think a lot of people carry shame because they don't read 50 pages an hour.
Yeah.
But I felt very seen by Bauer's argument here. She emphasizes that speed is absolutely not the goal. Understanding is the goal.
In fact, as the author explains, reading slowly is often a sign that you are doing it right.
Really?
Yes. If you are breezing through Kant or Faulkner, you probably aren't reading them. You are just looking at the words.
Just letting your eyes glaze over the page.
Exactly. She offers very specific tactics in this chapter. The most important one, you must read with a pen in hand.
Oh, that feels almost sacrilegious to some people actually writing in a book.
But it is essential to the framework. If you are not marking up the text, underlining key terms, or arguing in the margins, you are likely slipping into passive consumption.
It keeps the brain fully engaged.
It does. She also talks about setting realistic time blocks and, crucially, the absolute necessity of rereading.
Because you can't get it all the first time.
You cannot get the full depth of a great book on the first pass. It is impossible.
It is a relief to be told that rereading isn't a failure. It is just part of the process.
Right.
Speaking of tools, let's talk about chapter number 3. She devotes an entire chapter to the reading journal. Now, I know what some listeners are thinking right now.
Dear Diary.
Exactly. Dear Diary, today I read Plato and felt really sad about the state of the world. But that is not what she means at all, is it?
Not at all. This isn't about your feelings. It is about data processing.
Okay.
As Bauer explains, the reading journal is non-negotiable. It is the physical space where you perform that trivium method we just discussed.
So it is a workspace.
Yes. You use the journal to move from the grammar stage, literally writing down plot outlines or summaries of arguments, to the rhetoric stage of personal reflection.
It effectively forces you to slow down. I mean, you cannot skim a book if you know you have to summarize a chapter in 2 sentences in a notebook afterward.
Exactly. And Bauer notes that keeping a written record allows you to identify patterns over time.
What kind of patterns?
You start to see conversations happening between different authors across centuries. You realize that an idea in a novel from 1850 is directly responding to a philosophy from 1750.
And you miss that connectivity completely if you don't write it down.
You do. With a journal, you can flip back and say, wait, Locke said the exact opposite of what Rousseau is saying right here.
She also touches on preparation in chapter number 4. I think her advice on choosing a book is really practical.
Choose something that is challenging, but not impossible.
Right. And this is the one I'm definitely guilty of skipping. She says to always read the prefaces.
Yes, never skip the introduction. We tend to view the intro as the boring part you have to get through before the real book starts.
I always skip it.
But Bauer argues it gives you the roadmap. It tells you the context, the author's intent, and the historical setting. Entering a complex book without reading the intro is like wandering into a foreign city without looking at a map first.
You were just going to get lost.
Exactly.
We are going to dive deep into the specific genres Bauer covers, from fiction to the newly added science section in just a moment. We are going to look at exactly how you apply this grammar, logic, rhetoric framework to different types of writing. But first, we want to take a brief second to mention something that aligns perfectly with this journey of self-education.
That is right. If you are enjoying this deep analysis, you should check out Mindful Moments.
Yes.
It is our YouTube channel offering AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques.
It is designed for inspiring reflection and rational thought, and it is incredibly valuable for aspiring authors who want to see how great books are constructed. So check out Mindful Moments. Now let's get back to Bauer.
We have established the method, the trivium, and the tools. the journal. Now we move into what was really the meat of the summary, the genre walkthrough.
Bauer breaks the book down into specific genres, calling them the story of, which I actually find very helpful.
She mystifies them.
It humanizes these big, scary literary categories. Let's start with fiction, or as she calls it, the story of people.
In chapter number 5, Bauer traces the novel from early experiments like Don Quixote all the way up to postmodernism.
A huge span of time.
But what is critical here is the application of her method. She argues that reading fiction requires you to first note the facts plot, character names.
Yeah.
That is your grammar stage. But then you have to shift to logic, which means analyzing authorial choices.
Can you give us a concrete example of what that logic stage looks like when you are reading a novel?
Sure. Instead of just getting lost in the story and letting it wash over you, you stop and ask questions.
Like what?
Why is the author telling this story from the butler's perspective instead of the general's perspective? Why is the timeline fractured? Why did they skip 10 entire years between chapter 3 and chapter 4?
You are analyzing the structure of the storytelling itself.
You are. And then the rhetoric stage in fiction isn't just asking if it was a fun story.
No.
No. Rhetoric in fiction is judging the book's view on human life.
That is deep.
Does the author think people are inherently good? Do they believe in fate or free will? You are engaging directly with the author's worldview. You are asking, is this a true representation of human nature as I know it?
It completely elevates fiction from mere entertainment to philosophy.
It does.
Next, she moves to the story of me, which covers autobiography and memoir in chapter number 6. I think this is where people often get tripped up, thinking a memoir is just nonfiction and therefore it is 100% true.
This is one of the most important chapters for modern readers. Bauer makes a very sharp distinction here. She argues that autobiography is a constructed narrative of a self.
Constructed?
Yes. It is not a raw, objective data dump of a life. The key insight she offers is that the reader must analyze what the author chose to include, but even more crucially, what they chose to omit.
That is such a powerful way to read a memoir. You are actively looking for the gaps.
Right.
You're asking, why is this person telling me this incredibly detailed story about their childhood, but completely leaving out that one major scandal?
It is all about analyzing the self-presentation. Is the author trying to justify their past actions? Are they trying to seek forgiveness from the audience? Are they settling a score with an old rival?
It is never just a simple recounting of facts.
Never. Bauer provides a reading list that moves from early spiritual confessions like St. Augustine all the way to modern political memoirs. It helps you see that the concept of the self isn't a static thing. The way we talk about ourselves has fundamentally changed over the centuries.
Let's pivot to the story of the past, which is history, in chapter number 7. As someone who loves diving into history, I found her take on this incredibly refreshing. She warns against treating history books as purely objective, which is a hard pill to swallow for some people.
This is a massive critical thinking exercise. Bauer highlights the crucial difference between the raw facts, the dates, the battles, the treaties, and the interpretive framework the historian uses to arrange those facts.
So the raw fact is, say, the war started in 1939. The interpretation is the war started because of economic anxiety.
Precisely. The because is always an argument.
Always.
In the logic stage of reading history, you have to actively separate the two. You have to identify the historian's specific argument. Is this historian a Marxist? Are they a great man theorist?
What lens are they looking through?
Right. Bauer encourages readers to see that history is also a story. It is an argument about why things happened, not just a dry list of things that did happen.
Then we have the world stage, covering drama in chapter number 8. Bauer says we need to read plays as embodied conflict. But I have to admit, reading a play is weird. It is all dialogue. It feels so incomplete compared to a novel.
That is because it actually is incomplete until it is performed by actors. Drama is unique because it is meant to be seen and heard, not just read on a page.
So how do we read it properly?
Since we are reading it, Bauer advises paying incredibly close attention to stage directions. But mainly because you don't have a narrator inside the characters' heads explaining their thoughts like you do in a novel, you have to analyze how conflict drives the forward movement.
You have to look at the interactions.
Yes, you look at how the play moves from exposition to crisis. It is a pure study in human interaction and tension.
And that brings us to the genre that probably scares everyone the most. Poetry.
The dreaded poetry chapter.
Chapter number 9, History Refracted. I admit it freely. I usually skip the poetry section in bookstores entirely. It is just intimidating. But Bauer seems to want to take the fear completely out of this.
She really does. She describes poetry as a concentrated, image-rich way of seeing experience. Her advice for the intimidated reader is incredibly grounding. She says to start strictly with the literal meaning.
That is the grammar stage.
That is the grammar stage.
It is such a huge relief. I think we are all conditioned in high school English classes to immediately look for the hidden meaning in every single stanza.
Exactly. We hunt for deep symbols before we even know what is literally happening in the poem. Bauer says stop.
Just stop.
Don't immediately hunt for hidden codes. First, just figure out the basics. Who is speaking? What are they physically describing? Is it a flower? Is it a battle? Is it a lover?
Just understand the basic English sentence first.
Yes. Once you have that literal meaning, then you can move to the logic of the poem, analyzing the meter, the rhyme, the structure.
And then rhetoric.
And finally, rhetoric, which is the emotional or intellectual truth the poem is actually conveying. But you have to earn the right to analyze the metaphor by understanding the literal image first.
Now, we have to mention something very specific to the updated edition of this book.
Right, the new material.
Bauer added a completely new section, chapter number 10, called The Cosmic Story. This covers science. At first glance, this feels like a departure for a book focused on classical education.
It is a significant addition, but a deeply necessary one. Bauer recognized that to be truly well-educated in the modern world, you simply cannot ignore scientific literacy.
It is everywhere.
She frames science writing as the story of understanding the natural world and humanity's specific place in it.
And how exactly does the trivium apply here? Because science feels like it is entirely grammar, just hard facts, E equals mc squared, gravity exists. Where's the room for rhetoric or having an opinion?
That is a very common misconception, and actually a dangerous one. Bauer argues you must apply the logic stage to technical arguments just as rigorously as anything else. Science writing is still writing. It has a hypothesis, it presents evidence. You have to ask, does the evidence provided actually support the conclusion the author is drawing? Or is the author making a massive leap of logic?
Especially today. I mean, pick up a paper on nutrition or climate change. You desperately need to be able to parse the actual data from the broad conclusion being pushed in the headline.
Exactly. In an age of conflicting scientific reports, this skill, analyzing the logic of a scientific claim, is incredibly empowering for a layperson.
It gives you control.
It stops you from just passively accepting a dramatic headline and forces you to look at the actual study. Bauer provides a reading list here that ranges from classical works by Aristotle or Darwin all the way up to modern popular science.
Making it accessible.
It creates a curated pathway for those of us who might feel technically intimidated by the subject matter.
Stepping back from the specific genres for a second, there is a beautiful overarching theme Bauer uses throughout the book called the Great Conversation. It sounds very grand, but what does she actually mean by that?
This is truly the heartbeat of the book. The Great Conversation is the idea that serious reading allows everyday adults to enter a dialogue that has been going on for centuries.
Like a giant debate.
Yes. When you read Locke, you are literally seeing him talk back to Hobbes. When you read a modern novel, it is often whispering back to the Odyssey.
It makes reading feel significantly less lonely. You are joining a dinner party that has been running for 3,000 years.
And you have every right to be at that table. This connects directly to another major theme in her framework, the democratization of intellect.
I love this part.
Bauer is very firm on this point. Intellectual growth is not somehow reserved for academic elites sitting in ivory towers. You do not need a PhD to read the Federalist Papers.
Anyone can do it.
There's a profound dignity in difficult books, and she believes, and this is a quote I absolutely love, that if you can read a newspaper, you can read the classics. It just takes practice and method.
That is so incredibly encouraging. It completely removes that pretentious gatekeeping attitude that often surrounds literature with a capital L. It is not about being fancy or showing off. It is just about being human.
Finally, Bauer links reading to moral practice.
Moral practice.
Yes, it is not just about being smart or winning arguments. It is about building character, the sheer patience required to sit and read a complex text, the fairness required to evaluate an argument you might completely disagree with. These are classical virtues.
It builds empathy and discipline.
A well-educated mind is, at its core, a patient, fair-minded mind.
So bringing it all together, what does this all mean for us today? Why should we genuinely care about wrestling with these dense, difficult texts when we have infinite streaming services and podcasts right in our pockets?
It comes down to one word: Agency.
Agency.
Bauer implies that until you can accurately analyze and evaluate arguments, until you can truly master those logic and rhetoric stages, you are essentially at the mercy of other people's ideas.
You are just a sponge.
You are a passive vessel for whatever the media, politicians, or some algorithm decide to pour into you.
That is a genuinely chilling thought. If you can't read deeply, you can't think independently.
Exactly. A well-educated mind is an independent mind. It is a mind that can look at a claim, take it completely apart, check its foundation for cracks, and decide for itself whether it actually stands up to scrutiny.
In a world of total information overload, that is the ultimate superpower.
It really is. It is the fundamental difference between being a passive consumer of content and being an active, engaged participant in the world of ideas.
And it is never too late to start. That is Bauer's promise to the reader. You haven't missed the boat just because you didn't read the Iliad when you were 19 years old.
The conversation is always waiting for you to join.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We so often think of reading as a way to escape reality, just a way to turn off the brain after a long day at work.
We treat it like a vacation.
Right. But based on what we have discussed today, maybe real reading, serious, difficult reading, is actually the only way to truly engage with reality. If we stop reading deeply, do we slowly lose our grip on the truth? It is definitely something to think about.
Indeed it is.
If you found this summary helpful, we have a clear next step for you. Click the link on screen for the in-depth book critique. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
Your mind is the most valuable tool you have. Sharpen it.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.